part of the Ukrainian-Russia conflict, and particularly Ukraine's internal dynamics, where calls for elections have been made by the former defense minister. That was fired by the Ukrainian president. For that, we've been joined by Cormac Smith, who's a British diplomat. Thank you very much, Cormac, for joining us and being a part of the show today. I'd like your perspective in terms of when we take a look at the kind of address that has been given by the former defense minister. Of course, there seems to be a way forward that he's talked about. He's pressed upon the fact that Russia shouldn't be guiding the internal dynamics of Ukraine. But will he have the momentum and support needed for that to actually happen?
Donna, hello. Thank you again for having me on. Look, I don't think he will, to answer your question directly. I've been speaking to people in Ukraine all day, and the consensus of opinion on Mr. Federov is in his recent address where he called for elections. He has overstepped the mark, and I think he is going to lose the support of a lot of people who would have supported him before this. And if I can give one example, it's a lady called Kira Ruddock, who is a member of the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament. She's actually the leader of the Holos party, which is one of the main opposition parties. And she was interviewed today on British media, and she was absolutely clear that what he was suggesting was not in the country's interest. And there's a suggestion that maybe his own interest and his own political ambition has now taken pole position.
Right, but Cormac, even before his address, we've seen that there was some sort of aspect and advocacy going around calling for elections within Ukraine. Can there be momentum, even if it's not through the former defense minister?
No, I think the vast majority of people know that there can be no elections held while this war is going on. One, it would be against Ukraine's constitution. Two, it would play into Russia's hands. It would be incredibly difficult to hold elections, and it would mean opening borders and weakening the state in a way that would be to Russia's advantage. And of course, we know that Russia would attempt to interfere in those elections. If I can remind viewers and listeners of an example, the United Kingdom, Great Britain, did not hold elections between 1935 and 1945 because of the Second World War. United Kingdom, I think, still regarded as one of the top democracies in the world. And, again, the United Kingdom wasn't even invaded. We were very, very badly bombed, and we were in the heart of a world war. So no, I think we need to forget about this idea of Ukraine having elections, because the vast majority of people recognize that it is not in the country's interest. It would be in Russia's interest, and in fact, it would be against the constitution of Ukraine. And let's just be clear on one thing: it is for nobody, not the Americans, not the Russians, not anybody else. It is for nobody to say that Ukraine should have elections. It is only for Ukraine to say that they should have elections, and they are a democracy.
Right, absolutely, and that's of course something which is granted. But in terms of the kind of dynamics that are evolving and the kind of prolonged war with Russia that we're seeing, and of course with Ukrainian leadership vying for support coming in from the European Union and the US, and a lot of that focus being shifted to the Middle Eastern situation, how then do you think that the presidency seeks to evolve the situation, and what really are the next steps for Zelensky?
Well, I think the majority of Ukraine's partners will recognize the validity of what I have just set out to you, that it is all but impossible and certainly not desirable for Ukraine to have elections. Maybe with the exception of the United States, we can expect pressure coming from Donald Trump to not necessarily to help Ukraine, but to help Russia. So United States aside, I think all of Ukraine's allies will support the decision and will support President Zelensky going forward. And again, to remind, Ukraine is in an absolutely existential fight for its existence at the moment. It's having its cities regularly bombarded now with Russian ballistic missiles, for which it does not have the defenses. It cannot get the Patriot missiles from the United States it needs, because one, the United States has certainly run its Patriot stores down very, very low with the war against Iran. And secondly, we have already seen the Trump White House slow walk certain supplies into Ukraine that have been previously agreed. So I'm afraid the future for Ukraine is very, very tough. Ukraine faces a very, very tough winter. President Zelensky's absolute priority is to get air defense missiles, and Europe, I think, will be working very hard to plug the American gap. Not an easy job to do, but also what we are expecting after the fake elections which Vladimir Putin will hold. And I say fake elections because we all know what the outcome of the Russian elections in September will be. It's now widely expected that after those elections, Putin will bring forward another round of mobilization which will see him conscript up to 500,000 more troops to throw into the front lines and the meat grinder in Ukraine. So, Ukraine is already facing a very, very tough battle for its survival. The last thing that it needs is the distraction of holding elections, and by the very nature of the mechanism of elections, one, they would weaken Ukraine by opening up its borders and suspending the army and all the other things that have to be done if elections are to be called. But also, we would fully expect that Russia would pour a lot of money into both disinformation and funding candidates that were friendly to them. We know that Russia, in Europe certainly, we know by experience that Russia has a track record for interfering in elections to get the outcome that's in their interest.
Great. And Cormac, how are you looking at advancements along Ukraine's aim to get the EU membership status? Of course, we've seen talks around the enlargement of the EU. There are, of course, other countries that are also vying for it, and it seems that is a debate undergoing. Even reform as part of the EU is being discussed. Do you think that Ukraine will be able to soon see a change in that, and that will affect the way it's interacting with Russia?
Yes, I think, in the last 2 years, we have seen Ukraine make very steady progress to EU membership. We have seen a couple of years ago now, about a year and a half ago, they were admitted into the accession process, and Europe made very clear at the time that they were achieving a number of reforms that were necessary for that. Of course, Ukraine as a member of the European Union is the last thing that Russia wants to see. It would strengthen Ukraine considerably, and in my assessment, having Ukraine both in the EU but also in NATO would ultimately strengthen the EU and NATO very much as well. So I can only give my assessment, and that's that I hope Ukraine's journey to European Union membership will continue. But I have got to say, Sana, I am somebody who is constantly frustrated and disappointed at the pace at which European leaders move to support Ukraine. I have always been one to say that we do too little, too late, and very often in the past, when we have given them things, we have given them conditions which restricted them. So yes, I see Ukraine moving forward, but I think our leaders in Europe need to do a lot more to welcome Ukraine into the EU family, and they need to see ultimately that it is something that will help lead to Russia's defeat and will be in all of our interests in Europe. I have no doubt that Russia is a threat to the rest of Europe. It does sometimes seem to me that some of our leaders haven't quite got the message yet.
Right, thank you very much, Cormac, for joining us and being a part of the newsroom today.